Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this seminar on the European Economic Area, the EEA. We do this twice a year, minimum, sometimes more often if we feel that it's necessary. We are happy to have some people in the audience, but we are not allowed to have too many, so you have to live with that. But we got some hundreds of registrations for online viewing, so we are hoping to have a really interactive seminar ahead of us throughout the day. Just to be clear that you can ask questions through the chat, those of you who are online, watching this online. So don't hesitate, and don't hesitate to tweet or any other social media about the seminar. We have quite an interesting program ahead of us, but we'll start by giving the floor to Geneva, where our Secretary General is located, Mr. Henri Jetta. So I call him just right now, and this should work. Bonjour, Mr. Jetta, the floor is yours.
It does. Thank you. Good morning, Jean-Finur, and good morning, everyone. And welcome to this latest edition of the seminar on the European Economic Area, the EEA. I'm speaking to you from Geneva, where EFTA is headquartered, the initial home of EFTA since its foundation in 1960. Symbolically, Brussels has become its second home in the meantime, and actually EFTA's largest workstation. Before we go into the EEA, let me tell you a few words about EFTA. The association was founded in 1960 with the signing of the EFTA Convention in Stockholm as an alternative to the newly formed European Economic Community at the time. At the outset, the objective of the 7 founding members were to establish a free trade area and to contribute to a broader economic development and integration in Europe. It's interesting to note that the basic economic aim of the EFTA Convention was the same as that of the Treaty of Rome, to create a market free of unnecessary barriers to trade. However, it was based on the traditional principle of intergovernmental cooperation, therefore different from the Treaty of Rome. Throughout these 62 years, EFTA has gone through several changes in membership. And as you can see from our logo, it now includes 4 member states: Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway, and Switzerland. While the other founding members are today members of the EU, with the exception of the United Kingdom. EFTA initially served as a framework for the trade relations among its members. It quickly evolved, though, into a platform to EFTA members' relation with the EU, with the free trade agreement signed in 1972 between the EFTA states and the EEC, culminating with the launch of the EEA Agreement in 1994. Beyond European trade relations, EFTA has become, since the early 90s, the common platform of its members for their free trade relations outside Europe. Today, we have more than 30 free trade agreements covering trade with some 40 countries across all continents. With that, one of the largest networks of free trade agreements in the world. This is the historic setup of EFTA. Today, the challenge relates to a lesser extent to the architecture of European relations and tend to relate more to key policy issues. As Europe is tackling the challenges of climate change, the digital revolution, the health union, social protection in an open market environment, sustainability at large, a growing trade nationalism at global level, so do the EFTA countries. In these turbulent circumstances, we at EFTA are convinced that the EFTA membership is of great importance to its 4 member states, as they need to build alliances and participate in international cooperation. Against this background, we at EFTA have 3 main fields of activity. First, the regulation of economic relations among the EFTA states. Second, the development and management of our worldwide network of free trade agreements. And last, but certainly not least, the management of the EEA agreement, our topic of the day. With the EEA, the 3 EEA EFTA countries have managed to secure a fantastic agreement to ensure a stable and favorable contribution to European integration for the benefit both of our people and companies and of those of our EU partners. EEA Efta countries' commitment to European integration and to European values is to some extent stronger than in some of the EU members. The credibility of the EEA is high, which helps us in our interactions with our counterparts from the EU institutions. The EEA agreement has, over the years, proven to be an extremely resilient construction. Since the conclusion of the agreement, the EU went through 4 enlargement rounds, 4 treaty reforms, including some substantial changes in the EU's own institutional setup, and had to overcome a number of crises. Meanwhile, the EEA cooperation continued, even consolidated, and still functions to the satisfaction of all parties involved. The EEA is also a demonstration of solidarity among the countries of Europe to overcome social and economic challenges. The so-called EEA and Norway Grants have made a lasting contribution to reducing social and economic disparities in Europe and supporting a free and vibrant civil society, which is beneficial for the whole EEA. Since the EEA agreement was signed some 30 years ago, Europe has, and the world have undergone profound evolutions. In my view, the key underlying reason for the EEA to prove successful in addressing these challenges over the years is the positive spirit of cooperation between the EEA After States and their EU friends and partners. This positive spirit, grounded on common values and the fundamental agreements of what we want from each other, this spirit continues to prevail, and I'm therefore confident that we will be successful in tackling upcoming challenges such as the green and digital revolution or the more recent health policy challenges. During today's seminar, you will get first-hand information on the EEA from some of the key personnel at the EFTA Secretariat and from the most relevant organizations that play a fundamental role in the well-functioning of the agreement, namely the EFTA Surveillance Authority and the EFTA Court. You will also enjoy a special presentations and dialogue with the 2 co-chairs of the EEA Joint Committee, which is the managing body from the agreement. Will be Liechtenstein's ambassador to the EU, who's currently chairing the Joint Committee on the EFTA side, and the Secretariat General of the European Commission. We're looking forward to welcoming the representatives from the Commission's SecGen, as they just took over, actually, as our counterpart on the EU side in the beginning of this year. I would also like to highlight some extraordinary sessions in the afternoon, such as decision shaping through the so-called EEA Efta Commons and the important role of the advisory bodies. Wish you a great seminar and encourage you to take part actively in the discussions throughout the day.
Thank you, Mr. Jetta. So we say goodbye to Geneva, and let's just take a quick look on the program before we go further. So we just had the opening remarks from Mr. Jetta in Geneva, and now we will go first to an introduction on the EEA by the Deputy Secretary General here in Brussels, Helge Marihoff, and then deeper into the functioning of the EEA with Marit, who is the Director of Internal Market Division at the EFTA Secretariat, which is sort of the machine behind all the EEA work. And then we will have, like we heard from Jetta, we will have the ambassador of Liechtenstein to the EU, which is chairing the Standing Committee, and our counterpart on the EU side, Mr. von Lingen. And then before lunch break, we will also have a deeper understanding on how EU law becomes EEA law, and a little glimpse to our publication on all the acts that need to be translated and published. And then in the afternoon, we start with the EFTA Surveillance Authority, and then the EFTA Court, and then the EEA and Norway Grants. And then after a short break, we will have special sessions, one on decision shaping. There's a lot of work done by our EEA After States on decision shaping. One of the tools is what we call EEA After Comments. And then we will also have the work of the advisory bodies, that's the Parliamentary Committee and the Constitutional Committee, and the former regions. And then we will also have a little understanding of the role of our statistical office in Luxembourg. So quite an extensive program ahead of us. So I think we should just go then straight into our first presentation, which is the introduction to the EEA by Helge Hoff. Here you are.
Thank you, Tushine. So, good morning, everybody, dear participants, friends and colleagues. Let me say it's a great pleasure to receive you both online and in the room that we have here today. My name is Helge Hoff. I'm responsible to oversee our work related to the EEA agreement here in Brussels. And today I will give you a very brief introduction to the EEA agreement, its scope, objective, and some principles. But before I do so, I would like to introduce you to the Secretariat. After all, you are here. So, as a matter of fact, we have 3 offices. The headquarters is in Geneva. You have already seen our Secretary General. That is where you find his offices. And that is also where you will find our colleagues that work with free trade agreements. That is all the agreements that our 4 member states enter into with countries outside the EU. Then we also have an office in Luxembourg, our statistical office. And as you know, we need statistics to do a good job. And finally, the EFTA Secretariat here in Brussels, where we are today, which by far is the largest part of the Secretariat. I do believe we are some 60 happy colleagues working in this fantastic building that we have recently moved into. And here we reside together with our sister organizations, the EFTA Surveillance Authority and the Financial Mechanism Office. And you will meet representatives from these organizations later on today. So, what is that we do in the EFTA Secretariat here in Brussels? Well, our core function, to put it very short, is to assist our member states in all their work related to the EEA agreement, what we call the EEA process. That is the work that takes place from an act has been proposed on the EU side and all the way into incorporation into the EEA agreement. And that is quite some process, and it takes a lot of work and support. And that is why what we call the EEA machinery. And you will learn a lot more about that later on today. We also have a very important role in coordinating work between our 3 EEA EFTA states. After all, we do need to agree before a decision can be taken. So we help them coordinate their work. Also, we coordinate work between the EFTA states and the EU side. And we are very happy to have a representative from the EU side, our counterpart in the Commission here later on today, who will give you his or the EU side's perspective on our work. Finally, we are also Secretariat to the EEA advisory bodies, that is the social partners, the parliamentarians, and also a forum for the regional authorities. And all this you will learn more about later today. So let's move on to the EEA agreement. What is the EEA agreement? Well, I'm sure you know by now that it is an agreement entered into by the EFTA states on one side, which is today are Norway, Liechtenstein and Iceland, and the EU on the other side. It entered into force in 1994. And the purpose is to establish a European economic area with common rules and equal conditions of competition, which in short means extending the internal market to the participating EEA After States, so that we have one common market with 30 member states and some 450 million people. That is quite something. And this agreement, there are two very important principles that govern this cooperation. The first is that the agreement is dynamic. What does that mean? Well, it means that it presupposes that all new legislation is supposed to be incorporated continuously into the EEA agreement. And of course, for that to take place, we need a decision-making system. The second very important principle that governs the EEA agreement is homogeneity. It means that, well, we have the same rules on paper, so to speak, but of course, we also need to apply, implement and apply and enforce the rules in the same way. That is what we mean by homogeneity. And for this to happen, we also need an institutional setup for surveillance and judicial control. That means the EFTA Surveillance Authority and the EFTA Court in Brussels. So this is the objective of the agreement and the principles. So let's look at what it takes to fulfill this in practice. Let's look at the scope of the EEA agreement, the rules therein. Well, at the core of the EEA agreement, we have the so-called four freedoms. That is what creates, that is the internal market, the core of it, where there shall be no unlawful restrictions on the free movement of goods, persons, capital, and services. And to make sure that this level playing field is not hampered by other forms of restrictive practices by companies or member states, we have other common rules. We have the competition rules, which prevents companies to agree on prices or to abuse a dominant position. We also have rules on state aid. Of course, a member state may grant state aid, for instance, now in COVID. That has been a very important tool, but it needs to take place in a certain manner. It needs to be lawful. Also, through the EEA agreement, there is a cooperation going beyond the core of the internal market, and that is what we call the horizontal policies. For instance, within the field of environment, social policy, consumer protection, very important, and statistics, which you will learn more about later today from our colleagues in Luxembourg. And finally, when it comes to the material scope of the EEA agreement, one very important aspect is EU program participation. Our member states participate in programs to a very large extent, be it in research and development, education, for instance. I see that we have quite a lot of young people attending today, which is great. And many of you might have benefited from the Erasmus exchange program, which also is due to the EEA agreement and our cooperation there. So this is the substantive scope of the EEA agreement. But as I said, the agreement is dynamic, and we need more than just the substantive scope. We need institutions and decisions to be taken. So now I will turn to the institutional setup of the EEA agreement. But before I do so, I think it is worthwhile to take a look at the background, to note the fact that EU and EFTA cooperation, that is two different models of cooperation. So I will just look at that. because that is important to understand why we have the institutional setup that we have in the agreement, and also why sometimes there are specific issues we need to address when we incorporate new legal acts. First, the EU model is built on supranationality, transfer of competence and sovereignty to the EU institutions. Whereas in EFTA, the EFTA model is a traditional intergovernmental cooperation where we have not transferred competence or common policies, or we have common policies. And also in the EU model, we have institutions with defined roles in the decision-making process: the Commission, the European Parliament, and the Council. The EFTA model is built on decisions being taken by consensus between the governments. And an important concern for the EU side is to preserve, of course, the decision-making autonomy of the EU, whereas on the EFTA side, the important concern has been to preserve the sovereignty of the EFTA states and their governments. And also on the EFTA side, we need to respect the constitutions of the member states. So, to reconcile these two different models of cooperation and at the same time fulfill the objectives and principles of the EEA agreement, we ended up with this institutional model, also referred to as the two-pillar structure. And the reason we call it the two-pillar structure is that it reflects that EEA cooperation takes place in two different pillars. On the one side there, you will see the EFTA pillar with its institutions. And on the other side, we have the EU pillar with its institutions, and also the establishment of certain common bodies. I know this model, it looks quite daunting and intricate, and I will not go into detail. And actually also, you will meet people here, representatives here later on, who will give you a face to these boxes and also fill in with content. But it's important just to see the structure. And what is also striking that this is a very elaborate institutional model. You cannot find this model in any other agreement. So, just very briefly, the highest governing body on the political level is the EEA Council, where the parties meet on a political level twice a year to discuss the political development of the agreement. For the daily running of the EEA agreement, the Joint Committee is the most important body, and that is where we come together to take decisions on incorporating new legislation into the EEA agreement. And here, decisions are taken by unanimity. We, on the EFTA side, we speak with one voice, and the EU side, even there are 30 countries and the institutions, they also have one voice. And on the EFTA side, you see the Standing Committee. That is the highest governing body on the EFTA side. And that is where our member states come together and discuss and agree before they take decisions in the Joint Committee. And of course, they do a lot more. And we are very happy to have both representatives later on from the EU side to explain their perspective and how they see this work in these bodies, and also Liechtenstein's ambassador to the EU, which now holds the chair of the EFTA side in these bodies. So I will leave it at that. So you can wait in excitement till our colleagues explain more later on. Then, so this I would say is the part that caters for the dynamic part of the EEA agreement. But we also need to safeguard homogeneity. We need to safeguard the fact that the rules are enforced and applied correctly. And here we have the EFTA Surveillance Authority, which then oversee the implementation, the enforcement of the EEA agreement in the member states, and also that the companies respect the rules of the agreement. And if there is a disagreement between the member states and the EFTA Surveillance Authority, the cases can be brought before the EFTA Court in Luxembourg to be resolved. And a representative from both these bodies will come later on today. But what I would like to say, what is special about this model then, where we have these two pillars, is that there is no transfer. The EEA agreement does not transfer competence from the member states towards the EU. The competence rests in the EU pillar, and it is for the institutions in the EU pillar to make sure that the EU side respects and apply the EEA agreement and their obligations. I think I will leave the structure as it is for now. Just note that the material scope of the EEA agreement and this institutional structure has remained unchanged ever since the entry into force of the EEA agreement. Whereas on the EU side, we have had treaty amendments and we have new ways, new areas of cooperation and new competences. And here I'm particularly thinking about the agencies, the development of agencies in all sectors of our society, and some of them also are very important in the internal markets. And some of these bodies, they have been given competence to adopt decisions that are binding towards member states or companies. And sometimes, and we have needed to find solutions that fit within this model. And sometimes that has been challenging. But what I can say is that we have always found solutions. And which is why we always like to say that the agreement has been robust and flexible. And with this, I leave you with a little image from when we marked the 25 years of the EEA agreement. In March 2019, you might say it's already history. Well, what I would say that it certainly represent well, the picture shows, let's just say that, it's our three prime ministers at that time and EU heads of state and government. They came together to mark the EEA agreement and the 25 years of cooperation. And I think it very nicely reflects the importance and the magnitude of the cooperation and the commitment that the contracting parties share to this cooperation. So with this, I thank you for your attention and I give the floor to my colleague Marit. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikke. Yeah, the questions. We have a couple of questions in the chat already. Thank you for that. But we will take questions after Marit's presentation, so they will reply to questions together. So now, next up is the functioning of the EEA and the work of the EFTA Secretariat in Brussels. Marit, Shaka, and
Thank you, Knud. You will hear me well, I hope so. So let's move from the heads of states into the machinery. So my name is Marit Skage-Andrea. I am the director of the Internal Market Division in the Secretariat. And as it's been mentioned a couple of times, this is what we call the machinery of the agreement here in Brussels. This means that we have the responsibility of all the policy areas within the EEA agreement, and also for preparing all the legal acts for further incorporation into the agreement. And the Secretariat, as Hege also was mentioning, is assisting the member states in the management of the agreement. And here also the Internal Market Division has an important role. I will introduce you to what this work is all about, the structural framework that we work within, and also the role of the Secretariat in this EEA work. And finally, I will take the opportunity to highlight a couple of special areas that has been high on the agenda for us, or for all of us lately. So let's go ahead now. That was wrong, right? Here, this shows an overview on when and how Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein can be a part of the participation and engagement in the process. Again, you can here recognize the two pillars. On the right, you see the EU process, very shortly described. And on the left side, you will see how the EFTA states are contributing. We are contributing all along the way, and the Secretariat has the role to assist along the way. But to better grasp what the management of the EEA agreement is all about, I would like to show you some numbers. At the time of the signing of the agreements, that was a couple of years before it came into force in 1992, we had 1,875 acts incorporated into the agreement. Today, we are at about 14,000. That is quite a lot. And about 6,000 plus acts are still in force. And this is because some acts are repealed or they are replaced by others. The area of food and veterinary is by far the biggest one, representing 40% of all the acts incorporated. This allows us to have full compliance with the EU rules on the food chain. It means frictionless export of seafood and agricultural goods. And it means no veterinary import or export controls because we are a full member, or we are fully in line with the rules that are the same rules that are all over the EEA. Apart from customs, since we are not a part of the customs union. Then we have some other high volume sectors: transports, air, road, maritime, and general transport, financial services, and goods, and that is technical regulations and specifications related to industrial goods and all the goods. And this means, of course, that engagement in the development of new legislation at the EU level, followed by timely incorporation, is essential. Because, as Hege was saying, the aim for our work is to ensure a homogeneous internal market throughout the EEA. And we do that with the homogeneity that, of course, timely incorporation is going to serve. Also, the dynamic nature of the agreement that we are, in fact, incorporating new act. This is not a static agreement. And it is consensus-based. These are the principles. That sounds easy, doesn't it? Well, there are some challenges because of the nature of this agreement. One of the things is that to achieve this homogeneity, we need speedy incorporation. And this incorporation, it takes time by nature. Why? Well, because we just start the moment the EU formally adopts a legislation. So we are already starting a bit behind. This means that, for instance, we are having a sort of a backlog, what we call it, which means that there are acts that are waiting to be incorporated into the agreement. Also, increased complexity of new EU acts to incorporate. This will cause additional delays because we have to assess it on our side and we have to find ways that it fits into the agreements. Hege was mentioning agencies, so new powers is given to EU authorities. This we didn't even think of when we signed the agreement. So This is challenging the two-pillar structure, which means that we have to find solutions. We have to make the EU legislation fit in to the agreement that both the EU and we are part of in this sense. And then finally, we have had some, and of course, the increased volume of acts. EU is producing even more. We're having big packages and big challenges like environment. We are having the Green Deal and so on. That really makes the volume increase, which is, of course, is influencing our work. Brexit and COVID has also given us some new challenges that I will mention a bit later on. So to help us and to facilitate the EU work and to meet the challenges we have, there is a structural setup, as Hege was mentioning. And the Secretariat has then a role in assisting the member states. When we talk about the incorporation to the agreement, we are at this level. Standing Committee is the highest body, as Hege was saying. And this, but of course, before a legal act comes there ready for incorporation, there has been a lot of work done already for months, sometimes even for years. So going a bit backwards in time, this is about how EU law becomes EEA law. And I will give you a glimpse of this work and the role of the Secretariat in this, this process. So this is under or behind the Standing Committee. The Standing Committee is then assisted by 4 subcommittees, or actually 5, but 4 when it comes to the areas of the agreement. You see there are the 3 of them are taking care of and responsible for the 4 freedoms, and the last one is flanking and horizontal policies. In these subcommittees, we have the Minister of Foreign Affairs in our member countries represented. And that's sort of the first step of the more formal incorporation procedure. But again, before that, a lot of work has been done in our expert groups and working groups. As you can see, and these are not all of them, but we have also working groups within the Secretariats, in the sense that my officers have divided the agreement and all these policy areas in between them. And they are responsible for all of these working groups. In these working groups, we have experts coming from the capitals, either from the ministries or authorities who are experts in these different fields. Some of the areas is so technical that we even have expert groups that are mainly under the technical barrier to trade. And the working groups somehow is our window to the world, because this is where it all starts. When an EU Act is adopted, actually on the 5th floor here, our EEA register, it comes into us. She registers it and sends it to the expert responsible for the expert group, and that's how it goes out to the countries, to our member states. And we assess, and the member states assess, and that's how you start looking into to the work. And the luxury we have is that we would invite the Commission, we would invite stakeholders or anyone who has a say, even at an early stage of the process, where they can come to us. We can discuss together to better understand what the Commission is thinking and what the member states are thinking of the proposals and the way ahead. And that's also a way of how we can do our contribution. So that was the structure. What about the work? Well, the work is divided, we can divide in 2 strands. One is the decision shaping. That is participation in the development of the EU legislation before EU adoption. And it is decision making, or incorporation into the agreement of an adopted EEA relevant act. And during the decision shaping, which is actually even at the level where the EU side is thinking of creating new policies, they are making studies, and before they make a proposal. We have a formal way of participate, and we have a informal way of participating. The formal participation is in the EU expert groups and committees. This comes from the EEA agreement, where we are said to be consulted at the same level as the member states. So participation in these expert groups in the Commission is, of course, essential for us. There are hundreds of them and all different levels, all different areas of the EEA agreement. Then we have the early assessment by the EEA EFTA expert groups of EEA challenges. And again, we can go and we are very welcome by the Commission to discuss, to understand better what they are thinking and how we can then fit it into our system. And then, of course, there is the informal contact where we don't have a formal role from the EEA agreement, but when the proposal is gone from the Commission to the EU member states in the Council and to the European Parliament. Both our experts from the capitals, but also assisted by our officers, would then reach out to stakeholders, but also, of course, then policymakers and decision makers in the EU bodies to try and be a part and contribute to a legal to making the legal acts and the new legislation something that would and give our input, sometimes even having the best practices or good practices, learning from each other. This is, of course, a very time-consuming part of the work. And unfortunately, the challenge is also that since we have the incorporation process with its deadlines, this is what we have to do. So the decision, being a part of the decision shaping is challenging, but we are still prioritizing it, and you will hear a bit about it later on today. The second part of our work, I'm not going to say too much about, that's the decision making. The decision shaping was the blue part. Then we have the red part all the way through what the Secretariat is assisting, and we have close cooperation with the EU side until the point where we agree on a joint committee decision that we then send to the joint committee and they adopt it. But the Secretariat's role along here is also to assist the member states. We are facilitating the work through the working group. We are inviting them to come here, of course, during COVID, more online. But this is all a part of the work that helps in the decision-making process. And that is also some kind of addition to the legal work. I just wanted to show you this one because I mentioned a bit the backlog and the fact that the agreement itself makes us lag a bit behind. This is very new statistics, and I'm not going to go all the way into the details, but if you see over there at the far right, for those of you sitting there, you see that last year there were more than 700 acts adopted on the EU side. And in fact, into the EEA agreement, we had 663 acts, and of those more than 721 acts, 60 of them were not EEA relevant. So as you see, even if we have a backlog, the speed of and the capacity and what we are doing is not too bad if you compare it to the enormous amount of acts decided upon every year. The red line you see there, or orange, is the so-called the monitoring list showing how many acts that are awaiting incorporation, that are enforced in that are adopted on the EU side, but not yet incorporated into the EU agreement. So even if we have a backlog, we are constantly looking into our procedures. This is, of course, handled by the Secretariat, but in close cooperation with member states to improve. And also we have constant dialogues also with the EU side on this. So finally, I just want to mention a couple of hot topics that we have been working with for the last couple of years. COVID-19 pandemic made us having to jump around, and also on the EU side to have measures to ensure and secure a continuous well-functioning internal market. It was important for us to have goods, food, medical goods across Europe, and it was essential to us that the EEA countries also were a part of this. So 81 COVID-19 related acts were incorporated since spring 2020, and 17 of them were characterized in a way that we had to incorporate them to special urgent written procedure, just to make sure that we maintained life and health, I suppose, and also that we did not hamper the internal markets. And then we're not done, so we're still doing this. Next week, we will have additional 13 acts incorporated through a special written procedure. And the role of the Secretariat in this is that we closely monitor all measures are adopted by the EU in response of the COVID-19 crisis. And we do assist the EFTA states with any relevant measures and to ensure a speedy incorporation. I'm not sure, but I've heard some rumors that some of them were just jumped around and incorporated with a time frame that we have never seen, I think, when it comes to incorporation into the EEA agreement before. Then finally, another important area that Hege also mentioned a bit, the EEA After States participations in the programs in 2021 to 2027. This is a cooperation outside the four freedoms, but it has its legal base in the EEA agreement. The aim is to attain the objectives of the agreement, or if it's deemed to be of mutual interest of the parties. So the EEA After countries do have a substantial financial contribution. In 2020, it was 500 million euros, and now in last year, it was close to 600 million euros. So we are basically paying for the programs that we are participating in, obviously. And again, maybe especially for you, or for many of you, I suppose, Horizon Europe and Erasmus Plus accounts for more than 2/3 of the total of the EEA budget, the EEA After budget to the programs. Horizon Europe is the big research program, and this is of course also essential to the EFTA states. In the coming next years, these are the programs that we will take part of. This will help us be integrated even further into the European societies. It will make our citizens and businesses develop, contribute to research and development that is moving our societies forward to the benefit of our citizens and to our businesses. If you want to know more about these programs, I suggest you to go into the EEA, to the EFTA site, where we have a special page on the EU programs. That was that for me as a kind of a crash course, and you will be served more details later on today. Thank you.
Thank you, Marit. And yes, now we have some time for questions, so don't hesitate. We already have some questions in the chat. The first one is the following. Thank you for your presentation. Do you think the principle of sovereignty would have been possible to uphold if EFTA had more member states that were also parties to the EEA agreement? So, Hege,
thank you. Does it work this much now?
yes.
Yeah. Well, when the EEA agreement was negotiated, we had more EFTA states. We had, in addition to our 3 states, we were Austria, Finland, and Sweden, with the same principles that apply today. So that is my answer. And Yeah, I'd leave it at that. Mostly maybe it's a political question.
Yeah, actually the same has a follow-up question. Has the accession by a third country ever been discussed? Doesn't really define a third country if it's
Well, we have of course enlarged the EEA in parallel with the new EU member states. But when you think about possible other members, EEA EFTA member states now, there's been no negotiations, so that's no.
Yes. Any question from the audience? I have another point in the chat, but if the audience has any. Yes, there is a question over here. But first, maybe Hege from the chat. Thank you for a great introduction. Could you comment on Protocol 31? It's a very old question.
I'm very happy with the last part of Mari's presentation when she talked about cooperation outside the four freedoms and typically program participation. That is Protocol 31. Because the agreement itself foresees that the contracting parties may want to cooperate closer in areas outside the four freedoms, and that is foreseen. And when we do cooperate in these areas outside the four freedoms, that cooperation is incorporated into the EEA agreement, also through a decision by the Joint Committee, but it is put into Protocol 31 of the EEA agreement. And there are certain, and so this is what we call voluntary participation. It is not required, but we want to participate. And there are certain differences when it comes to implementation and enforcement, because unless we decide so, the EFTA Surveillance Authority, for instance, they do not have any competence to foresee that we implement these. But of course we do. Yeah.
Question for, I think, Marit. So my question is, how do you solve disagreements about whether an EU legal act is EEA relevant?
How do you solve a question when of EEA relevance?
Yes,
of
EEA relevance
agreement.
Well, first of all, you will get even more information about this by my excellent colleague Finnur this afternoon. But to make it very short, to judge whether this legal act has EEA relevance. Of course, interesting enough, it's a fact that, on the EU side, they will also do this kind of assessment. So they would sometimes mark this is EEA relevance. Sometimes they don't, and it is still EEA relevant. But the point is, we have to, on the EFTA side, assess that ourselves. And to put it short, it depends whether it's within the scope of the EEA agreement. If it is within if there are internal market rules, for instance, it is EEA relevant.
But the agreement foresees that that this is a process leading up to a decision by the Joint Committee in the end. So the parties to the agreement, they need finally to agree on that question. And should there be a disagreement, they need to resolve it in the committee. This is not a question that can be answered by the court. It is for the party through a political dialogue to agree on finally. But mostly it's quite clear what it is. What is EEA relevant? But it can be a question, of course.
All right, we have another question on the chat. Are there any mechanisms in place to ensure uniform participation, in brackets, one voice, for national experts, as there are expert groups both under the EU Commission and the Standing Committee?
Well,
one of you
yeah, I mean, if you think of the experts of the Commission, and I'm sure the Commission representatives will arrest me if I say something wrong, but there, of course, we are sending our national experts from the member states, but they're also there as experts, and no decision is really, I mean, we don't have a voting right, but we have a formal formal right to be there and to discuss, but to ensure the same, to say unanimously between the working groups of EFTA and the working groups of Commission. I think they're just playing a bit two different roles. So of course it is discussed, but again, I mean, when you come from the capital, you have your mandate from there. So and I don't even know if there is a need to be unanimous there. It's more a sense of contributing at an early stage in the expert groups.
Thank you. There's another question here. Does the EEA agreement feel any strain from the increase in acts adopted by the EU year on year? More than 700 acts adopted in 2021 seems like a big burden for both EFTA and the EU side process. It is, yes, but
yes, I mean, yes. Of course, this is a challenge. It demands an incredible amount of resources, and this is also why I was, as I was showing you, a part of why we have the backlog. So I guess this is an essential part of my job, to make sure that our processes are working as good as possible. We do that also with the capitals. We look at our procedures constantly. I know, of course, as our Secretary General was mentioning earlier, that the EEA files that used to be in the External Action Service of the EU is now moved to the Secretary General's office. So hopefully, and again, we are cooperating with them to make that work. And I think on both sides, we are looking at ways of making our procedures efficient. But yes, an increased amount of acts. We see that it's a fact. It is sort of has an effect on the backlog, but it doesn't mean that we will eventually get there, and we do. But resources is the key for sure.
Thank you. Maybe one last question before we break, and I think Eke should take that one. I actually thought this question was not relevant any longer, but it's an ongoing question for the last years. Because as EFTA started, when EFTA started, United Kingdom was a member, founding member, and now then they went to the EU. But after Brexit, could the UK get back into EFTA?
As you say, it is a hypothetical question because that is a venue that the UK has not chosen. But theoretically, the answer is yes, they could be a member of EFTA. Yes,
and actually you find on our website both the EFTA Convention, Article 56, that defines how a new member state could, or new state could become a member. And also through the EEA Agreement, you find also on the website Article 128, how a new EFTA state could possibly become party to the EEA agreement. But this is all hypothetical, as you said. So I think we can break now. We are actually right on time. We'll have 10 minutes break. And then we will have the chair of the EFTA Standing Committee and our counterpart from the Secretariat General in the European Commission, showing how this works on a higher level, we can say. But let's break now for 10 minutes. Thank you. We'll resume at 10:40. Okay. So, welcome everybody back from our short coffee break. So, like I have said before, please throw in questions in the chat, tweet if you like, hashtag EEA, or even new hashtag that we will use this spring, hashtag we are the EEA. So try to be the first one to use that one. You heard about the institutional setup of the EEA agreement, and now we have those who are representing the two parties in the joint committee. On the EEA After States, we have the chair of the standing committee, and on the EU side, like we just heard, it was just transferred from the EEAS over to the Secretary General of the European Commission. So now we'll have two short speeches and then a dialogue. So please try to ask questions to both of them. But first, I give the floor to the ambassador of Liechtenstein to the EU, who's also chairing the Standing Committee, Ambassador Pascal Schaffers.
Thank you. Does it work? Yes. Thank you, Torfinur, and good morning. It's a pleasure for me to be part of this seminar for the first time, actually. Enhancing the knowledge of the EEA agreement is, of course, an essential priority for me and also for Liechtenstein here in the Brussels neighborhood. I find it very encouraging that actually close to 200 people are following this seminar to know more and to learn more about our agreement. As it was mentioned, Liechtenstein has the honor and pleasure, I have to say, of chairing the Standing Committee during the first half of 2022, an honor that repeats itself. It's rotating, so we have that every 1.5 years, only being 3 parties. Also has the benefit that the EEA EFTA trio is always constituted of the same 3 countries, which is also a difference between the EU and the EEA if you look at that. So I'll use the opportunity to say a few words about the Standing Committee, the Joint Committee, the EEA Council before focusing on our priorities for this 6 month. Let me start with the Standing Committee. As you have heard, it brings together the ambassadors of the EEA After States. We meet about 8 times per year. And the purpose is mainly of the forum. It serves an exchange platform. And we prepare the meetings with the EU side in the Joint Committee, which usually take place the day after. Liechtenstein, Iceland and Norway are like-minded countries with many overlapping values and interests. So in almost all cases, you can say it's actually a very nice and pleasant meeting among friends, if you so want. Now, the EEA Joint Committee is then where we meet with the EU side to formally decide on the incorporation of new legal acts into the agreement. You have seen it's a couple of hundred of them every year. These meetings usually take place, as I mentioned, after the Standing Committee, and they are rather formal but effective and an important channel for us to also touch base, share our views and raise concerns. As you have seen, the EEA agreement is being updated continuously, around 8 times a year with 50 to 100 acts forming part of 40 plus decision in the Joint Committee every time. And it's exactly this dynamic nature of the agreement with its institutional setup that is one of the reasons why it functions actually so well. This makes the agreement flexible and, together with its broad scope, allows us to adapt to new challenges and opportunities more easily. And let me give you an example here. During the COVID-19 pandemic, when the world was basically standing on its head, we could collaborate, find solutions, and both adapt and adjust legislation and guidelines together with our EEA partners in a smooth and effective way. And by adopting this series of EEA or COVID-19 related acts in the Joint Committee, where meetings have continued to take place during the pandemic, although virtually, we have, for instance, been able to secure the procurement and distribution of vaccines and as little disruption to the free movement of goods and people as possible. Now let me go to the highest level, as it was mentioned, political level, which is the EEA Council. That one, as Hege already said, takes place twice a year. And that's where the foreign ministers from our 3 EEA EFTA states meet with the EU Council Presidency, European External Action Service and the European Commission to review the functioning of the agreement and provide political direction to the EEA cooperation. These meetings are an important area for our ministers to discuss practical and political issues concerning the implementation of the agreement, like the example I mentioned before, the effects of COVID-19, for example, as well as topics of high political importance and high on the agenda. We have discussed new industrial policy, strategic autonomy, Europe's digital future, climate change, and so on, just to name a few. These regular exchanges also show that the EEA After States and the EU share many of the same values. Now, coming back to the agreement, The EEA agreement with its broad scope, ranging from the 4 freedoms and to participation EU programs, you have heard a lot of it already. With that broad scope, the EEA agreement is certainly the most successful and far-reaching cooperation the EU has entered into with non-EU states. And this is why we, the EEA After States, consider ourselves second countries, if you so want, which is an important distinction in the comparison of the often binary perception and division of the world here in Brussels into EU member states and third countries. So we think there's something in between, which is the second countries. And it's with this in mind that we have made reaching out and providing information, training and insight into the workings of the EEA one of our main priorities. After all, it is a success story with thousands of EU acts incorporated into the EEA agreement. I think 14,000 was the number over the years and applied in our 3 countries, thereby integrating Iceland, Liechtenstein and Norway into the internal market. I think it's an achievement we can all be proud of. And it's exactly for that purpose, to continue this successful path of cooperation and participation, that the EEA and its unique setup and specificities, like the 2-pillar structure or full participation rights only falling short of voting, should be widely known. This would ensure that the EEA is taken into account across all fields where it is of relevance. And I can assure you, these are many, and the links are not always as obvious as in the case of its core, the internal market. Being aware and conscious is key here, and this is what we want to achieve together with the various players involved to create something like an EEA reflex or an EEA instinct, if you so want. Now, a second priority for us is what we call decision shaping activities, and Marit has already elaborated on those. This means scrutinizing EU policy initiatives and legal act at an early stage, presenting EEA EFTA comments in order to shape legislative processes on the EU side. We recently submitted 2 EEA EFTA comments on the Digital Markets Act and Digital Services Act, as well as a comment on the new anti-money laundering package. These are important policy areas for us, and we have a lot of relevant expertise to contribute. Of course, such specific comments come on top of closely following EU proposals like the European Green Deal, including Fit for 55 package, Europe's Digital Decade, European Health Union, and the EU Strategic Compass for Security and Defence. Now, other priorities of our chairmanship ensure that the EFTA states' participation in EU programs is based on the rights and obligations specified in the EEA agreement, to work towards launching a future financial contribution of the EFTA states to social economic cohesion in the EEA, which I believe FMO will say a bit more about that area later today. And last but not least, and you already have heard of it, to ensure timely incorporation of relevant legal acts into the EEA agreement, which is an important part and very crucial to preserve the homogeneity of our internal market and thus essential for our businesses and citizens. Now, as the EEA files were recently transferred from the European External Action Service to the European Commission, we also here do what we can to help facilitate a smooth transition. And on this note, I would actually like to take the opportunity to thank the European External Action Service for the good cooperation during the last decade. We have worked together diligently to ensure the well-function of the agreement, and we are certain that this common spirit will also guide the work with our new counterpart on the EU side, the Commission Secretariat General, who is represented here by Niklas von Lingen, who just sits here and who will give his or the EU's perspective as soon as I finish, which is now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me today and also for organizing this seminar. It's very important to me and also to all the colleagues in the Commission who will be implementing this agreement, have been for the past 25 years and will continue to do so, that we understand from our both perspectives how we see this agreement functioning, but also what our priorities are. Because I think this is about an agreement that needs to work, but it also needs to live with its age. And we hope that this provides the right basis for that. That's what we've seen over the past 2 years, and that's what I wanted to to say perhaps as the one message is this is an agreement that is working, and we need to make sure that it continues to deliver for all the citizens of our 30 countries who participate actually in this one market. But it's not only in one market, it's one space where they move freely and they benefit from anything from education to research, also to just being able to move around. So if I'm very happy to follow suit on my co-chair in the joint committee. They were very grateful in ensuring a seamless transition from the European External Action Service to the Commission Secretariat. But on the EU side, you will see that hopefully we speak the same voice because it's an organizational, but the commitment decision, but the commitment is there. What it does help is it brings it a bit closer to where the heart of the EEA agreement is. It's internal market, it's all these flanking policies, and they sit mostly within the Commission. And so we thought it was a good idea to bring it closer. We do not replace Director Generals, that's very important, because they are the ones who really will make this agreement live. We're there to help, and I think, as you mentioned, to make sure that the EEA reflex is there at all times, and that this agreement is fully integrated in the reflections of the Commission when it devises policies, when it also negotiates with the co-legislators, and also when it implements these agreements going forward. So I think it bears just recalling how special this relationship is. We've seen it over the years because we've also developed a relationship with other very close partners on the European continent. And if you look at the other relationships we have, whether it be with Switzerland, with other 3 countries with whom we're negotiating an association agreement, or with the United Kingdom, with which we developed also a model of cooperation. There was always the EEA as an example, as a model, not necessarily one which was replicable or replicated, but as something which was special. And I think probably it was a good time when people rediscovered the beauty of that agreement that actually functions. So for us, this agreement will remain a model, not a model that's necessarily replicable, but one which we are happy to nurture going forward. As you mentioned, we were able to also deal with the challenges of the COVID-19 crisis. This has been a challenge even within the European Union. So it's also good that we were able to take also the EEA on board. There will always be periods of adjustment, but hopefully now we are in a space where we have been able to show that we want to make our EEA internal market work just as well as the EU's internal market. So we also have some shared priorities. This is the recovery, it's a Green Deal, it's also strategic autonomy, issues which we have enshrined also in our EEA Council conclusions, matters which will of course require that in the nitty-gritty of the daily implementation, and also incorporation of any developments, but also in the decision shaping. I think that's, I agree that there's certainly a very valuable contribution that EFTA states can make to developing the most up-to-date and efficient legislation. We want to make sure that we can have something that works politically, but also works technically. And the agreement is an agreement which is it's complex, but it's okay. We're the EU. We know complex. We have quite a few layers. We're actually even more member states than in the EFTA states. So we surely are happy to take up that challenge. What I wanted to say also is maybe highlight a number of these files which we were able to close over the past years and months. Important files such as the tobacco directive package, the organics production. It looks very technical, but sometimes these very technical issues take time. It is important that we make sure that the level playing field is maintained without too much delay. We will be looking at the way we work on our side to make the incorporation as swiftly as possible. And in that, we're looking very much forward to working with the colleagues in the EFTA Secretariat as we look at our own procedures, also making sure that we can together deliver what is purely technical we do and we process in the most automatic way. And where there are need for policy discussions, political decision, policy discussion, that we have the time to reflect about those and are not just administrating an agreement, but also shaping how that agreement works and can work going forward. And this is the challenge from this dynamic takeover. Dynamic means that it needs to be quite close to any changes that take place. Dynamic means also it needs to take into account the new developments and where we can, we have new policies which are being developed, new ways of functioning within the union. We have decentralized quite a bit to agencies. We also need to take this reality into account, but also what will be something which is very important for the EU is making sure that the balance of rights and obligation remains properly reflected. We have agreements which have their very own function, this two-pillar structure, which to some extent mirrors what we do on the EU side. Once again, it's not an easy structure, but it's not because it's a bit more complicated that it cannot work. We're trying to make it work on a daily basis on the EU side. So we're happy to help also on your side where you think that is helpful. Maybe one last word, I think, to come on to thank actually the colleagues in the EFTA Secretariat and also in the EES for helping us in this transition, because we, as I said, it's the incorporation, I think, last year of over 360 acts, joint committee decision covering 600 acts of EU legislation. And more is to come this year. That's also our hope, that we will be able to incorporate even more. Not making a promise, but hopefully we can do that together. We are lining up our machinery to make sure that we can resorb the backlog that has been accumulating, and also that we can focus on the priorities. And that's really the two things we really are looking at. So once again, thank you very much, and happy to take any questions you might have.
Questions from the audience, maybe? Actually, I got a question myself, because I got a question from the press last week or something, and that was I forwarded that to your office. I don't know what happened to it actually, but the question was about whether there was any whether the reason for the transfer from the EES to the Secretariat General was any complexity in the files or something like that. Was that the reason behind it? I just said you have to ask the Commission. So
thank you, and sorry if I didn't not answer because I didn't want to answer. I think I don't want to speculate what the reason was for that. I think the way I see it is it makes an awful lot of sense, because the EEA agreement is essentially an extension of our internal market and our flanking policies and our policies, which are very close to what the Commission does on a daily basis. That is something which fits very well into a Commission structure, and particularly in the Secretary General, which is used to precisely coordinating the position. Because I think the risk is having something which is entirely decentralized. I wouldn't say it's a risk, but you can have a model in which it's completely decentralized and in which then you don't have these antennas for the, is this EEA relevant or should I be having my EEA antennas on? And what is this approach that we're taking in this sector, which is a new sector? Have we done something similar in the past that we could take inspiration from? Or should we see if we can do things a bit differently? And having a coordinating structure at the level of the Secretary General, which is used to dealing with precisely these types of issues, I think is certainly a very good idea. Now, it's quite exceptional because there are very few partners with whom we actually have such a unit that is there to coordinate, because usually this dealt with by the EES, which has absolutely its important role of external representation, and also by the Directorate Generals, who are the ones who know best how their agreements work. But the EEA agreement is not a suite of different agreements. It's one agreement that has a structure, has a logic, and we need to make sure that we apply it in a coherent manner. So that, I think, is the logic and the way I take it from here.
Thank you. Any question from the audience? Yes, over here. Can you introduce yourself first? Thank you.
So good morning. My name is Marcus. Now enjoys my work for the EFTA Surveillance Authority. Many thanks for your presentation. I thought it was very informative. I do have Mr. Schaufhauser. Your presentation focused on, I think, the challenges and the priorities for the second half of 2022. And I was wondering whether you could speak a little bit about the opportunities that there could be in the second half of 2022. We sit today, I think we're almost coming out now of the COVID pandemic era, and we're sitting here in this building, which is the EFTA House. So many of us here, I think, in this room work for one of the family organisations inside the EEA After family, so the FMO, the EFTA or the Secretariat. And there seems to be here a kind of a momentum a little bit towards collaborating more, particularly between those different bodies. And I was wondering whether that could mean that there was more of an ability for us to collaborate more closely as those three organisations. And for example, things like perhaps having a single ombudsman, if there was a single ombudsman where people could come with any issues that they would have in relation to any three of those bodies, or so if there was any kind of initiatives that would bind together and allow a closer collaboration between the family organisations. I think that's clear.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And yes, I did focus on the, well, I don't think much on challenges, but on what we're planning to do. And I see that also as opportunities. So we would like to do all of this, what I mentioned, and I'm so happy to hear that I think we are also like-minded and aligned on this. Now, on the what I did not mention is some of the elements how we would like to do it. And one of them is exactly the building we are here. The EFTA House that brings together the three organizations after many years of separate housing is, of course, a center in the EEA cooperation here in Brussels, which we would like to use. And I think it was mentioned in one of the earlier interventions that there is also the idea of inviting colleagues here, also from EU institutions and others, to learn more exactly in this outreach, to get to know the EEA, to get to know the people, which is something I think which is important now after 2 years locked away somewhere. In my case, it was mainly a basement. That's where my home office was. To be able to be out soon, maybe with masks also not on when you're not speaking. So I think we'll have these opportunities of this interaction. And this house, this building with its marvelous rooms and conference center will obviously be cornerstone for such outreach activities. Now, the other point you mentioned is obviously speaking from a member state point, the fact that we got the three organizations to move together here has a lot of potential also in synergies. Some have already been achieved, some are obvious, some will develop over time. But this being together and meeting each other when the home office is mandatory home office is abolished, which I think is tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken. So if people are here and meet, that this will foster a cooperation and working together. On your specific point on the ombudsman, I think the EFTA House, yes, we are the member states, but it's the three organizations. You are the tenants, you live together. So I think we are obviously very open to proposals from you. I'm very happy if more collaboration and synergies materialize. I'm asking for that on a regular basis. But I think the first step is the ones on the floor, on the ground, is the three organizations. I think you know very well what is good, what works, what should be established, and certainly not a roadblock on such a path. But very happy to see more and more cooperation between the three of you and us, and because this is how we proceed in the best way possible.
Thank you, and we have a couple of questions in the chat. I guess it doesn't really say if it's to whom of you with this, but I guess it's to you, Pascal. To speed up incorporation of acts, why not simply extend the right of decision taking with the obligation that if a yes vote for the three EFTA states, the act is immediately incorporated?
Wonder why we haven't come up with that idea yet.
What created it?
Well, actually, I think the first part is exactly how it works. You know, you need a yes from the three EFTA states to incorporate it, but there is a bit more attached just because me and my colleagues in the Standing Committee, and then together with the EU side in the Joint Committee, say yes, the act might be incorporated, but it's not applied, it's not implemented in the member states, and that needs work, time. It needs to be transferred into national rules, national laws, and so on. And I mean, if we had a magic wand, we could say yes and do all of that, we would certainly do it, but we're still searching for that.
And actually, we will after this have a better presentation on how EU law becomes EEA law, and the national parliaments, for instance, play a role. There is a question here that, yes, I guess it's for you as well, Pascal. Does the special solution designed, well, actually, you could comment on it as well. The special solution designed for Liechtenstein in the EEA agreement, which restricts the four freedoms, namely the freedom of movement, pave the way for a more flexible integration for third countries in the future. Could more countries enjoy the same? Maybe we could take it as well.
Should I start?
Yes.
I say it's a very special solution for a very special situation that was recognized in 1995. I think this goes to the core of what the internal market is. It's a special regarding free movement of persons. As you will have partners, this is really existential for the EU. This is really a core element of our of how we perceive the internal market. It's about the four freedoms fitting together. One freedom doesn't work as well if you
cherry pick or if you just take some aspects of it. And this is also the entire principle of the EEA agreement, that normally everything is supposed to be incorporation of the rules. We can, in the process of incorporation, look for special arrangements where there are special situations, and we have a number of those over the years. And because this is part of an exchange on that specific act once, and then we see. Now, sometimes we see that we're still negotiating adjustments to one act, and the EU has, in the meantime, moved to another act in the same area, which is a bit more either more constraining or goes in a different direction. So it's a bit of a challenge if every time you have to renegotiate what actually has been agreed by 27 member states and which will apply in 27 member states to renegotiate this at a later stage. So obviously you will see it's fairly uncomfortable. It creates a situation where you don't have necessarily the same rules, which is not the principle on which the single market is based. Now, so this is, I would say, the normal business of incorporation in the EU. Then there might be some, I would say, special arrangements. But again, I think this is linked to the very specific nature recognized at the time. And we need to take it really on a case-by-case basis, but with, I would say, the lens or the goggles, because it's February, with which we'll be looking at those questions are these principles.
Any add to this? Let's go.
Not to the, if it paves the way for the future, but just one comment. I think the question was a bit strongly phrased. I would have to say that Liechtenstein does not, special solution does not deviate from freedom. I mean, basically, the free movement of workers is, as it used to be, free movement of persons is applied. Human citizenship directive is applied. Everything is there. It was, as Nicholas said, at the time there was a discussion on the size, and already Liechtenstein having a small population, small territory, and already a lot of foreign nationals living there. So there was a mechanism found that not everyone can come and take up residence there, but there is a limitation. There's a constant increase, minimum increase of I think about 2% if you count it all together. In reality, it's more because you have the families, you have replacements and so on. So it's a couple of hundred EU citizens every year, which is quite a few percentages increase. That is a minimum agreed, but there is no restrictions or anything on taking up a job in Liechtenstein. So this is open to all EU EEA nationals, and if you're ever there, you will see we have many EU nationals working in Liechtenstein, also in sectors and administration parts, which are in most countries restricted to nationals.
Thank you. Maybe one last question before we end the session. What Mr. Doningen maybe has talked about it already, but the question came after that. Is the relocation of the EEA files an indication that the EU will be giving greater priority to the good functioning of the EEA agreement?
Greater than what? Make the EEA great again. I think that's already a great agreement. As I explained, I think it's bringing it closer to where it's actually being managed. If you want to put the EES is very good and has been set up as the external representation and to deal with the political relations, to deal with CFSP and multilateral engagement with our third country partners. The EEA is a third country relationship, but I think to take the words of I'm not even sure I want to use second country, but if you want to use another, it's very close. It's very close to what we do. So, and I think it's part of this reflex when we think about developing something at EU level for the 27 member state. What does it mean, or how can we also project it in our space, in our internal market, which has 30 countries, not only 27. So I think it's that what it represents, and that's I don't want to say what it represents, but how we're going to make it work, because that's what matters. It's how we're going to make this work for the next 25 years.
At least Yes. So, any further comments? So, thank you so much, both of you. Maybe we'll start. So we continue with the program. We had two presentations before lunch break. We will go now straight to how EU law becomes EEA law. And we have here with us the head of EEA Legal Coordination, Mr. Philip Birkes. Please.
Thank you and good morning. Fantastic to have the chance to be here again in EFTA. Well, the first time actually in EFTA House, but again in front of people on the EEA seminar. So very happy to be here and talk about how EEA law EU law becomes EEA law. And as has already been kind of mentioned, this is not something that happens automatically. The fact is that every year the EEA Joint Committee takes hundreds of decisions incorporating new EU legal acts and making part of the EEA agreement. And that, of course, requires very efficient, clear, transparent, and effective procedures to manage to do that, because every single decision of the EEA Joint Committee is in fact amending the agreement and can be considered as an international agreement in itself. So we have actually quite a lot of very useful information about this on our website. We have a web tool that explains this in some detail, and we have also a video that is very informative, and those that are interested, I would very much encourage you to look into this. We have divided this process into basically 8 stages, and I will go through all of these 8 stages here, some of them quite quickly, starting from the first stage when the EU starts to prepare a proposal for new legislations, and ending in a period when this legislation has been adopted by the EU, been made part of the EEA agreement, and has been fully implemented by the EFTA states. So first, on the decision shaping, I believe that this has already been discussed here today, so I'm not going to go into very much detail into that, but I will highlight some point. The EEA agreement establishes that the experts from the EFTA states have the right to participate in the shaping of new EU legislation. This is particularly enshrined in Articles 99 and Articles 100 of the EEA agreement that allow the EFTA states to provide their views when new EU legislation is being formulated. Once a proposal has been formally submitted, it goes to the decision-making process within the EU, and there the EFTA states are not participants, and I'm not going to go into detail. That's a whole other study of how the legislative process works on the EU side. But the final stage in that process is that a new legislation is published in the official journal of the European Union. And often you will see when new legislation is published that it is marked as a text of with EEA relevance. This in itself has no legal effect, but it's an indication of the EU's view that the legislation in question falls under the scope of the EEA agreement. At this point, when the EU has adopted new legislation, the incorporation process can start. And the first start is identification and a preliminary assessment by the EFTA Secretariat. And the EFTA Secretariat screens all new EU legislation and identifies acts that may be relevant to the agreement. That is, acts that fall onto the scope of the agreement. And as we have kind of discussed, the internal market is very at the heart of the EEA agreement. And when we talk about EEA relevance, we are mostly referring to legislation that relates to the internal market. Of course, the EU has a few other policy areas, such as the common commercial policy, customs union, etc. And those fall outside of the scope of the agreement are not, and legislation in those fields are not incorporated. But legislation that falls under the internal market is usually EEA relevant that would be incorporated. So what the Secretariat does is to screen all new legislation and conducts a preliminary assessment. And there are basically two essential questions that the Secretariat looks into. Is this legislation that is EEA relevant? And if that is the case, are there adaptations needed when this act would be incorporated? And essentially every EU legislation, because it's adopted by the EU institutions and applied to the EU member states, needs adaptations. But that doesn't mean that such an adaptation needs to be made in every single case. That may sound like a paradox, but I will explain why a little bit later. Once this assessment is made, the new legal act is sent to the experts of the EFTA state, either members of the working or expert groups, for their assessment. And at this point, the Secretariat make an assessment on what kind of a procedure will be followed when in preparation of incorporating that act. And we make a distinction particularly between so-called fast track or standard procedure. The fast track obviously is supposed to be faster, and it's actually the procedure that is used more often, but it's also more simplified. But in the case of standard procedure, there is longer time that is given to our experts in assessing acts. When we are sending the acts, we do send out with different forms, but depending on which procedure is followed. I'm not going to go very much into the detail of these forms, but I will highlight that that even if the Secretariat proposed that a fast track is established or used, any of our member state can object to that, and then we will follow the standard procedure, and that provides for a longer assessment. So once the Secretariat had sent out these forms, then it's up to the experts in our member states to assess the acts. And again, the main questions that they need to assess are the two main issues that I referred to earlier. Is the act EEA relevant? And is there a need for adaptations? And when we talk about adaptations, we do kind of make two distinctions. First is the form of the adaptations, and we distinguish between three forms of adaptations: the so-called horizontal adaptations, sectoral adaptations, or specific adaptations. And as I mentioned, every single act really needs to be adapted, but the adaptation doesn't need to be done in every single case, because there are provisions in the agreement contained in, first of all, Protocol 1 of the agreement, and secondly, in some annexes of the agreement that caters to most of the adaptations that are necessary. So they are already actually are actually kind of part and parcel of the agreement. They don't have to be made in every single case. And a very common example of that is that any reference to EU member states or nationals of EU member states in EU legislation is actually covered by Protocol 1, the horizontal adaptations, and should be read in the context of the EU agreement as either a reference to the contracting parties of the agreement, meaning either the EFTA states or an EU member states, or the nationals of the contracting parties, meaning nationals of both the EFTA states and the EU member states. But If there is something in a legal act that actually requires adaptations that is not covered by either the horizontal or sectoral one, then we talk about so-called specific adaptations, and those are included in every single JCT that or the JCT that incorporates this specific act. But regardless of this, the effect of all of these adaptations is the same. When a legal act that has been incorporated into the agreement is read, it has to be read with the view of these adaptations. The other distinction that we made when we talk about adaptations is between technical adaptation and substantive adaptations. I will not go very much into the detail of this distinction, but I would just highlight that this relates to the procedures on the EU side. If there are substantive adaptations, that means that the EU Council needs to agree to such adaptations, but the Commission has a mandate to agree to so-called technical adaptations. So it can have a consequence for the length of the incorporation procedure, whether adaptations are technical or substantive. Now, all of our member states have their own national procedures on how to make the determination on these two essential questions, relevance and whether there's a need for adaptations. And we have some information on those procedures in our web tool that I referred to earlier. Once we have gotten the feedback from the member states, we can actually start the work on drafting the decision to incorporate an act. And this is done by the EFTA Secretariat based on the feedback that we received. Then when the drafting is done, it is submitted to the EFTA states, both in the so-called working groups and then in the so-called subcommittees, which are subcommittees to the EFTA Standing Committee. And once it has been approved there, it is submitted formally to the European Commission, to the General Secretariat, that on that basis can launch the so-called inter-services consultation, which is the basis for the EU approval of the draft. Now, at this point, we can go to the sixth step of this incorporation process, which is the review by the EU. As I mentioned, once we have submitted the draft JCT, it goes through inter-services consultation, where the relevant Director General and the Commission Legal Services assess the draft JCT and whether the services can agree to it, and whether they also have to assess whether there are any substantive adaptations that will require Council approval. And in that case, the draft JCT also has to go through the Council approval procedure. Now, once there is an approval by both parties, both the EFTA side and the EU side on the draft JCT, it is ready to be incorporated into the agreement. And that is, sorry, I should go to the next slide, as I already covered this. Yeah, once there is an agreement, it is the actual decision to incorporate can be done. And as I mentioned, the Joint Committee takes hundreds of decisions every year. And of course, you have to have some kind of a system on how to prepare a decision for adaptation. We do that by a procedure that we call the so-called long list procedure. And basically what we do is that the Secretariat gathers a list of all JCTs that have undergone this approval procedure that I have explained, and then sends that list of decisions that are ready for adoption to the General Secretariat, that assesses it, sees if they have concluded their own procedure, and if that is the case, there is an agreement between both sides on the list of acts, list of the JCTs, draft joint committee decision, that can be put on the agenda of the next EEA Joint Committee meeting. And the Joint Committee meets 6 to 8 times every year to adopt the decisions. Now, the EEA Joint Committee takes all decisions by consensus, so there has to be an agreement by both the EFTA side and the EU side in order to take any decision incorporating new EU legislation. Once a decision has been adopted, it will, in most cases, enter into force the day after. But there are some exceptions to that, and the most important one is if any of the EFTA states makes what is called a constitutional requirement to a decision. And according to the agreement, the EFTA states have the right to make this constitutional requirement when a decision is adopted. And that means that it shall not enter into force until the country in question has notified that it has fulfilled these constitutional requirements. Essentially, this means that this will have to go through parliamentary procedure. In the EFTA states, they have to, the member states have to get approval for parliament to incorporate these acts into the agreement. It is, according to the agreement, the states have 6 months to fulfill that, and if they need to go beyond the 6 months, they do need to notify the Joint Committee of this delay. Now, this is an example of a decision of the EEA Joint Committee, and usually has 3 main elements. First, amending the annexes, or in some cases protocols of the agreement, by including a reference to the acts that are being incorporated. Secondly, provision on publication, both of publication in Norwegian and Icelandic of the legal act that's being incorporated, but also a publication of the decision itself, and then finally enter into force. But if there are adaptations, specific adaptations that need to be made, that would also be included in the decision. Now, this is not the final stage. The adaptation by the Joint Committee and fulfillment of the Constitution, not the final stage, because all of this has to be taken, the EFTA states have to make sure that they have incorporated the acts into their own national legal order. That is, that they made them effective in their own national legislation. And this, of course, may require amendments to their legislation. And it is the role of the EFTA Surveillance Authority to monitor that the EFTA states are doing so. And any disputes on that matter can go to the EFTA Court. But you will hear presentations from both institutions in the afternoon. So that is essentially these 8 stages of incorporation that we have outlined, and are, like I said, discussed in more detail in the web tool that for those that are interested can consult. Thank you.
Thank you, Finnur. I guess there are some questions to Finnur already on this incorporation, or what? From the audience, maybe? Yeah? Or shall we have our next one up? Yeah, okay. So, Finnur, you can maybe stick around while we have our next colleague, Kjell Leifsen. I just need to get your presentation. Sorry about that. Yeah, so throw in questions in the chat as well to both of them. We will have now publication and information sources by our colleague Kjell Leifsen, who's head of translation and publication at the EFTA Secretariat.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about EEA publications and information sources that you find on our website. First, I would like to just quickly introduce our unit. We are currently 5 staff members, and we are responsible for publishing the EEA supplement to the official journal of the European Union, as well as translating EEA relevant text into Norwegian and Icelandic. And we also coordinate publications with third parties. So among our staff members, we have, for example, one native Norwegian and one native Icelandic translator. Like I said, we publish the EEA supplement every Thursday. Today is no exception. And we also coordinate publications with third parties, which, depending on the publication, can be either the European Commission Publications Office of the C series, the Secretariat General of the European Commission, the EFTA Court, the EFTA Surveillance Authority, as well as the Ministries of Foreign Affairs in Norway and Iceland. So our two in-house translators have a variety of tasks, and their translation work consists primarily of three different types of text. Notices from the European Union concerning the EEA agreement. So examples of these, for example, will be notifications of state aid, tenders, as well as prior notifications of company concentrations, which are very time sensitive. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen a sharp increase in state aid texts, and this is still the fact 2 years into the pandemic. Also, there are the decisions of the Joint Committee, which are our most important product. And the unofficial translations are usually available on our website within 1 week after adoption in Norwegian and Icelandic. And the third types of text we translate are judgments and advisory opinions of the EFTA Court, as well as decisions and notices from the EFTA Surveillance Authority. And again, the COVID-19 pandemic has seen a major increase in text from the EFTA Surveillance Authority, still after 2 years. So, yeah. Let's also look a bit about how current events affect the EEA supplement. I mean, we talked about because current events tend to impact the production of the EEA supplement. And we already mentioned the COVID-19 situation, which has seen a surge of text regarding state aid, both from the European Commission and also the EFTA Surveillance Authority. And the supplement will often also generally reflect other important issues that are dealt with. I've heard this mentioned previously here today as well, but for example, an example of this would be, for example, that we will have a special publication on the tobacco files that were mentioned earlier, which were recently adopted, which will happen in 2 weeks approximately. So that is one example. Previously, there was a lot of Brexit-related publications as well. And now I would like to touch a little bit upon the legal basis for why we publish the EEA supplement. And the basis can be found in Article 129 EEA, as shown here. And in this case, the crucial part of the text is the section about the text of the acts referred to in the annexes being equally authentic, both as published in the EU languages in the official journal of the European Union and in Icelandic and Norwegian in the EEA supplement. Furthermore, there is also an article in the JCD itself. And you can see here, this is article number 2, where it says that because this is where it's decided that this regulation that the Joint Committee decision incorporates needs to be translated and published, and that the translation will also be considered authentic. And finally, it's also annexed in the exchange of letters, which is the final part of the EEA agreement itself, that the EFTA states shall undertake to provide an appropriate infrastructure in order to ensure the timely availability of the necessary translations in the non-EU EFTA languages. The EFTA states will be responsible for producing the material for the production of the EEA supplement. So that's where we get our mandate to do this. Now I want to tell you briefly about a little bit of facts and figures. This is the total amount of supplement pages that we produce in a year. For the last year, this is comprised by 12,300 and something pages of legal acts. It's roughly 900 pages from the European Commission, 300 pages from ESA, 50 from the EFTA Court, around 50 from the Standing Committee, and approximately 160 pages of Joint Committee decisions. And seen apart from the amount of legal acts and Joint Committee decisions, these figures are quite similar to last year. And for 2022, it's busy, so we expect that this number will possibly rise if the trend continues the next year. So now let's look at the EEA supplement itself. This is sort of a facsimile of the front page. And the supplement actually contains 3 different types of publication. And it's also not uncommon that we publish several issues on the same day. Today, for example, we have published 2 different issues in Icelandic. So the first of these publications is a weekly supplement, which contains notices from the European Commission, and it may also contain translated documents from the EFTA Standing Committee, the EFTA Surveillance Authority, and the EFTA Court. And these weekly publications will almost always include merger notifications, like I mentioned before, because due to the short deadline for third parties to submit their possible observations on the proposed merger to the Commission, these texts and a few other Commission texts needs to be translated and published very quickly, which is basically within 8 days. So the second part is decisions of the Joint Committee. So text from the Joint Committees are always published on the same day as in the official journal, and this is a collaboration with the Secretariat General of the European Union. And they are then published in all the official languages of the EU in the official journal and in Norwegian and Icelandic in the EEA supplement. So both the weekly supplement text and the Joint Committee decisions are translated into Norwegian and Icelandic by EFTA's own in-house translators. So the third type of publication, which also makes up the largest body of text, is the legal acts, which are incorporated into the EEA agreement by the Joint Committee decisions. And the legal acts are translated by the translation centers of the Ministries of Foreign Affairs in Norway and Iceland. So what the EFTA Secretariat is responsible for is to publish them, and we do in accordance with the wishes of the translation centers. So then there's the last one is, of course, where you can find our publications. And the short answer is, of course, on our website. I don't know if this is actually... So if you go on our website, I'm guessing these links will not be clickable right now, but on the publications, you will find the subcolumn EEA supplement, and there you can find all the supplements arranged by year going all the way back to 1994, so they should be rather complete. There is also a section called legal documents, and under there you will find both the EEA agreement itself, the updated annexes, as well as all the translated Joint Committee decisions. And for those decisions which haven't officially been published yet, you will most certainly always find the unofficial translations in Norwegian and Icelandic. And we also have a tool which is called the EEA Lex, as you can see the little logo on the screen, which is very useful if you're looking into a specific act, for example, and want to know what the status is. So I see my colleague Thorfinnur is clicking here. So if Thorfinnur, if you, for example, would type for me 3/2015 D like David 1602. Click search. Yeah, and if you now click view the fact sheets, there you can see, first of all, on the top field here, you can see the status of the legal act. This is incorporated into the EEA agreement and it's in force. And then you can find link to the OJ or the official journal where you have all the EU languages, the English Joint Committee decision. And further down, you can also get the Joint Committee decision in German, Icelandic and Norwegian, as well as the translations of the act itself and the publication references. So you have all the information you need about the specific acts right there. So that's, yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And we actually have a question in the chat that could be for both of you. It's about rights and translations. So since the agreement is equally authentic in more than 20 languages, do EEA nationals ever rely on inconsistencies between translations to exercise rights differently than intended? Maybe Finnur, or I don't know. It's more about rights, I think, than actual translations.
Yeah, I mean, I can try to right, but of course there is a potential for inconsistency. And if that is the case, it's really for the courts to kind of settle that. So we of course we will have a presentation from the applicant and explain its role, the dialogue between the EFTA Court and the all the courts and that is really kind of that comes up for the courts to answer.
Yeah, and actually we will have presentation from of course ESA and the court here after lunch. So this might come up again. Any question from the audience, maybe? Yeah? No? Yes, here's one.
Not to check last as the last question, but if it's not deliberately used, are there any standards?
Could you repeat? I didn't hear. But what?
Yes, not the same as the last question, but if it's not specifically used by the After States or any individuals actors, are there any misunderstandings of how EEA law is interpreted due to language differences?
I don't recollect that there could be misunderstanding because of the language differences, and I think that in general, why all of the languages are equally authentic. There are translation. Both our translators and translation centers in Norway and Iceland, and on the EU side, really do a good job to make sure that the texts are clear. But of course, there can be, legal text can also always allow for differences in interpretation, and it's always potential for kind of different nuances arise in different translations. And in that case, it's a case for the lawyers, and particularly for the courts to find to decide what is the correct interpretation and use the tools that they have to arrive to the kind of the correct interpretation of the legal text in question. There can of course be misunderstanding, other misunderstanding of EEA law, but I don't think that this is really a source for this type of misunderstanding.
But wouldn't you say that, of course, the translation work that takes place in our member states, and I'm sure that there is a lot of discussions as to what term to be used, and there might be different opinions, and there is a huge responsibility upon our translation services, because many of these acts, they deal with rights to private parties, and of course you want that to be correct. So
yes,
yeah, it's nothing automatic about this.
You're absolutely correct.
You might shed some light on that.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. And of course, I know for a fact that the translation center in the member states, they work closely with the line ministries, especially when it comes to setting terminology, for example. There can be huge debates on a single word to make sure it's reflected correctly in both the practical use in the field of specialty, and also that it's coherent with other regulations. So there is a lot of, but fortunately they can consult with the line industries responsible for this specific area. Also, for us at the Secretariat, we also, should there be doubt or should there be something that might be ambiguous or unclear, our translators do have the luxury of actually being able to speak to the lawyers who drafted the text to clear out any misunderstanding. So that is also a good thing to have. And like Finner, I haven't really encountered any cases where misunderstandings in the translations have been a legal issue, but obviously no system is perfect, so you should never say never, but yes. Thank you.
All right, so are there more questions from the audience? We're actually on the minute, on time. So thank you, all of you. Of course, all the slides will be available afterwards, where you can find the links that they inserted in the slides. And Ken mentioned the sources on the website. Here you can see some of the EEA part on the website, and you find, for instance, the EEA supplement that he mentioned. That's where you have all the translations into Icelandic and Norwegian. And the EEA Next, what they both of them refer to is in the top menu, just like the EEA Web tool, explaining how EU law becomes EEA law. So let's break now for lunch. We resume again at 1 o'clock. We will have the EFTA Surveillance Authority, we will have the EFTA Court, and then several more presentations afterwards from the EFTA Secretariat. But enjoy lunch and let's meet again at 1 o'clock. Thank you.